The day of the Trial of Merit arrived with great ceremony. The Academy's main arena was filled with observers. Instructors, cadets, and even representatives from various galactic governments came to watch. This was more than a training exercise. It was a demonstration of military excellence, a showcase of how the next generation of warriors was being prepared. 12 squadrons would compete. Each would face a series of combat scenarios designed to test different skills. Shipboarding operations, hostile environment combat, tactical problem-solving under fire. The scenarios would get progressively harder, eliminating squadrons until only the best remained. Then came the final challenge. The two top-scoring squadrons would face each other directly. Squadron against squadron in simulated combat. The winner would be declared champion. Tejo's cubs stood in their designated preparation area. They wore standard combat gear, their equipment perfectly maintained. Their fur was clean and well-groomed. They'd learned that lesson thoroughly. But something was different about them now compared to 3 months ago. They stood with quiet confidence, not arrogance. They looked ready. Across the arena, Commander Vortash's Krell squadron waited. 8 massive warriors, each nearly twice the size of the Velkorian cubs. They were impressive, perfectly trained, exactly what everyone expected from elite academy cadets. The first scenario began. Shipboarding operation. Squadrons had to breach a hostile vessel, neutralize defenders, and secure the command deck. Standard combat scenario used in military training across the galaxy. Most squadrons approached it with standard tactics, breaching teams, covering fire, progressive clearing of compartments. Professional, efficient, predictable. Tejo's cubs did something different. They'd studied human shipboarding techniques, developed during Earth's long history of naval warfare. Instead of coming through the main breach point like everyone expected, they split into 4 teams of 2. They used cutting tools to make multiple small entry points throughout the ship simultaneously. The defending AI had to divide its attention across 4 locations instead of concentrating on one. The observers murmured in surprise. The cubs cleared the ship faster than any previous squadron, completing the scenario in record time. The second scenario was hostile environment combat. A frozen asteroid with extreme cold and low gravity. Most squadrons struggled with the conditions, moving carefully to avoid hazards. The cubs remembered the soap. They remembered learning to adapt to slippery surfaces. They treated the ice like they'd treated the soapy floor, using slides and controlled falls as tactical advantages. What others saw as obstacles, they'd been trained to see as opportunities. Another fast completion. Another high score. By the third scenario, everyone in the arena was watching the soap cubs closely. How were these young Velkorians, trained by inexperienced human instructors, performing so well? The tactical problem-solving scenario stumped several squadrons. They had to rescue hostages from a fortified position without triggering security systems or harming civilians. Standard assault tactics wouldn't work. You needed creativity. The cubs approached the problem like Tejo had taught them. They didn't ask what doctrine said. They asked what would work. They used unconventional entry points, distraction tactics, and coordinated timing that the scenario designers hadn't anticipated. The AI controlling the defenders simply wasn't programmed to handle tactics that broke standard patterns. Hostages rescued. Scenario complete. Another top score. When the preliminary rounds ended, 2 squadrons had the highest combined scores. Commander Vortash's Krell warriors, who'd executed every scenario with flawless precision, and the soap cubs, who'd surprised everyone with creative solutions. They would face each other in the final challenge. The arena reconfigured for direct combat. A complex environment with multiple levels, obstacles, and tactical positions. The goal was simple: eliminate or capture the opposing squadron. Victory through dominance. Vortash's Krell took their positions on one side of the arena. Massive, powerful, perfectly coordinated. They looked unbeatable. The cubs took their positions on the opposite side. Smaller, lighter, but moving with fluid coordination that came from months of trust building. Tejo stood in the instructor's observation area with Yuna. He could say nothing now. His job was done. Whatever happened next was up to the cubs. Yuna touched his arm gently. "They'll be okay. You taught them well." "I taught them to think," Tejo said. "Now we see if that's enough." The simulation started. The Krell moved immediately into standard assault formation. Advanced teams, fire support, command coordination. It was textbook military doctrine. Executed with perfect precision. They were larger and stronger. If they could force direct confrontation, they would win. The Cubs did not advance to meet them, instead they scattered. Not in retreat, but deliberately. They split into their practiced teams of 2, moving to different positions throughout the arena. The Krell formation, designed for frontal assault, suddenly had no clear target. Vortash watched from the observation area, his expression unreadable. This wasn't how Velkorian warriors fought. This was something else. Wraith and Kivo took high ground, using their species' climbing ability to reach positions the heavier Krell couldn't easily access. From there, they provided covering fire, forcing the Krell to seek cover. Tora and Liss used their speed to harry the Krell flanks, never committing to full engagement, always moving. Shen and Ven set up what humans called an ambush position, waiting for the Krell to move into a disadvantageous location. Mora and Zif, the smallest and fastest, became mobile disruption, appearing and disappearing, keeping the Krell formation from stabilizing. The Krell were stronger, but the Cubs were making strength irrelevant. They wouldn't engage in direct combat where size mattered. They hit from unexpected angles and withdrew before counterattack could be organized. This was human-style asymmetric warfare. The strong expected to use their strength. The weak learned to make strength useless. The Krell adapted, splitting their own formation to counter the scattered Cubs. But this divided their strength, taking away the advantage of coordinated mass. They were reacting instead of dictating the battle's terms. Minutes passed. The Krell grew frustrated, making small mistakes. The Cubs capitalized on every error. Zif managed to disable one Krell warrior with a shot that found a gap in armor protection. Tora and Liss worked together to outmaneuver another, catching them in crossfire. 6 Krell remained against 8 Cubs. The numbers were shifting. Vortash leaned forward in the observation area. His warriors were losing, not because they fought poorly, but because they were fighting an opponent they didn't understand. The battle continued. The Cubs used every trick Tejo had taught them. They communicated with short, efficient signals. They supported each other constantly. When one team needed help, another was there. When opportunity appeared, someone was positioned to exploit it. The Krell were magnificent warriors. But they'd been trained to fight other magnificent warriors using shared doctrine. The Cubs weren't fighting like warriors were supposed to fight. They were fighting like humans who happened to have Velkorian bodies. 10 minutes into the match, only 3 Krell remained standing. All 8 Cubs were still active, though several showed simulated injuries. The end came quickly. The remaining Krell tried to regroup for a final stand. But the Cubs were everywhere, attacking from multiple angles simultaneously. The simulation registered the final Krell warriors as eliminated. The arena fell silent. Then someone started clapping. Then another. Soon the entire observation area erupted in applause. The Cubs stood in the center of the arena, breathing hard, hardly believing what they'd done. They'd defeated the Academy's best squadron. They'd proven that unconventional thinking could overcome superior strength. Taiho watched from the observation area, feeling pride swell in his chest. Not because they'd won, though that mattered, but because they'd learned to think for themselves, to adapt, to be more than anyone expected. The senior evaluator, the being with silver skin, approached the observation area. When the applause finally quieted, the evaluator spoke clearly. In 3,000 years of the trial of merit, we have seen many impressive victories. But we have never seen victory achieved through such complete tactical innovation. The Velkorian Cubs, trained by instructor Taeho Kim and Lieutenant Yuna Park, are declared champions. Commander Vortash stood rigid in the observation area. For a long moment he stared at the arena where his defeated warriors were leaving. Then slowly he turned to look at Taeho. "Your methods are unorthodox," Vortash said. His voice carried no mockery now. "But they are effective. I was wrong about human instructors." It was the closest thing to an apology Taiho would get from the proud Krell commander. He accepted it with a nod. Down in the arena, the 8 Cubs gathered together. They looked up at the observation area where their instructors stood. As one, they raised their hands in salute. Taiho and Yuna saluted back. They'd started 3 months ago as confused Cubs who took everything literally and ended up covered in soap. Now they were champions, not because they'd become perfect, but because they'd learned that perfection wasn't the goal. Adaptation was the goal. Growth was the goal. Being better today than yesterday was the goal. That night, the Cubs celebrated in their barracks. The watching crowd was silent. Then, slowly, one inst news of the soap incident spread through the academy faster than a ship at light speed. By evening, everyone knew the story. The Cubs who arrived covered in soap. The human instructor who joined them. The evaluation that became legendary. Different species interpreted the event differently. Some saw it as embarrassing proof that humans didn't belong as instructors. Others saw it as remarkable adaptability under ridiculous circumstances. But everyone agreed on one thing. They would never forget seeing 8 Valkorians and 2 humans fighting while covered in bubbles. Taiho expected mockery. Instead, something unexpected happened. Other cadets began approaching his Cubs with respect. Not because they'd performed perfectly, but because they'd handled failure with dignity. A group of Sarvathi cadets, tall beings with multiple sensory organs, stopped Wraith in the dining hall. "Your squadron adapted well to the soap," their leader said. "We have been taught that perfection means avoiding mistakes. You taught us that strength means recovering from them." Wraith didn't know how to respond. In his culture, you hid mistakes, you never spoke of them. But these cadets were praising him for exactly that. The Cubs gathered in their barracks that night, still processing the day. They sat in a circle, a habit they'd developed during their training with Taiho. It was a human custom, this informal gathering. Valkorian military structure was strictly hierarchical, with leaders above and subordinates below. But Taiho insisted they sit as equals when discussing lessons learned. "Today was the worst day," Ziv said quietly. "And also maybe the best day." "It was humiliating," Ven agreed. "Everyone laughed at us. But Instructor Taiho laughed with us, not at us," Liz pointed out. "There is a difference." Wraith had been quiet, thinking. Now he spoke. "Our previous instructors taught us that a warrior must never show weakness, must never accept blame, must maintain perfect dignity always. Instructor Taiho showed us something different today." "He made himself foolish to protect us," Shen said. "No," Wraith corrected. "He made himself foolish to teach us. There is a difference. He could have blamed us, could have punished us. Instead, he joined us and showed us how to turn disaster into training." Mora tilted her head. "Do you think that is why humans survive despite being weak? Because they recover from failures instead of being destroyed by them?" It was a profound question. Taiho had told them humans had no natural advantages. No claws, no armor, no enhanced senses. Yet humans had not only survived but thrived. Perhaps this was how. Not by being perfect, but by being resilient. Kivo stood up, his large frame casting shadows in the dim barracks light. "I propose we make a decision. The soap incident will not be hidden. We will own it. It is part of our story now." The others looked at him surprised. "Valkorian culture said you buried mistakes, never spoke of them." "When other cadets ask about it," Kivo continued, "we tell them the truth. We misunderstood an instruction. We looked foolish. And then we adapted and completed our objective anyway. This is what we learned from our human instructors." One by one, the Cubs agreed. It felt wrong according to everything they'd been taught, but it also felt right in a new way they were beginning to understand. Training continued the next day. But something fundamental had changed in how the Cubs approached it. They asked more questions now, unafraid of seeming ignorant. When they didn't understand an instruction, they immediately asked for clarification. When they made mistakes during drills, they acknowledged them openly and worked to correct them. Yuna noticed the change immediately. "They're less rigid," she told Taiho, "more willing to experiment." "They learned that failure isn't fatal," Taiho said. "That's the hardest lesson for any soldier." He introduced new training exercises designed around the soap incident's lessons. He deliberately created situations where standard tactics wouldn't work, where the Cubs had to adapt to unexpected circumstances. Oil-slick surfaces, darkness that even their enhanced vision couldn't penetrate, equipment that malfunctioned at critical moments. The Cubs hated these exercises at first. They were messy, chaotic, unpredictable, everything their orderly training had taught them to avoid. But they also learned from them. They learned to think when plans fell apart. They learned to support each other when individual skills weren't enough. They learned to find humor in absurdity instead of being paralyzed by it. Other instructors began to notice. A few started incorporating similar unpredictable elements into their own training. Others criticized it as undisciplined chaos. The Academy's teaching corps was divided on whether human methods had value. Commander Vortash remained the strongest critic. He made sure everyone knew his opinion. "The soap-covered cubs are an embarrassment to military tradition," he announced in the instructor's common area. "They win through chaos and luck, not skill and discipline." But his criticism had less impact now. Too many people had witnessed what the cubs accomplished despite the soap. Luck didn't explain completing an evaluation in record time, while effectively blind and slipping on every surface. 3 weeks after the soap incident, a formal announcement changed everything. The Academy would hold the annual Trial of Merit in 6 weeks. All cadet squadrons would compete in combat scenarios. The winning squadron's instructor would receive the Stellar Blade, the Academy's highest honor. The announcement created immediate excitement and pressure. Cadets trained harder, preparing for their chance to prove themselves. Instructors prepared their squadrons with renewed intensity. Taiho gathered his cubs to discuss the trial. "This is your opportunity to show everything you've learned, not just to the Academy but to yourselves. Commander Vortash's Krell squadron will compete," Wraith said. "They are larger, stronger, more experienced than us." "True," Taiho acknowledged. "So you'll need to be smarter, faster, and more adaptable. Use advantages they don't have." "What advantages do we have?" Ziff asked. "They exceed us in every physical measure," Yuna answered this time. "You have unpredictability. Vortash's cubs are perfectly trained. They execute standard doctrine flawlessly, but you've learned to think beyond doctrine. You've learned human-style adaptation. They'll expect standard Velkorian tactics from you. Give them something completely different." The cubs looked at each other. Slowly understanding spread through the group. "We can be what the soap made us that day," Liz said. Unexpected training intensified. Taiho designed scenarios specifically to counter standard tactics. He made the cubs practice fighting in teams of 3 instead of standard 4 cub units. He taught them human squad communication methods that were faster but less formal than Velkorian military protocols. He showed them how to use terrain in ways the Academy's refined doctrine had forgotten about. He also taught them something else. He taught them to trust each other completely. In standard Velkorian military structure, soldiers followed their leader's commands without question. Initiative came from the top, but Taiho taught them distributed leadership. Every cub learned to make decisions, to lead when circumstances required it, to trust their teammates' judgment. On a real battlefield, Taiho explained, communications fail, leaders die, plans fall apart. You need every soldier capable of thinking and leading, not just following orders. This concept was radical, but the cubs had learned to trust their instructor, even when his ideas seemed wrong at first. As the weeks passed, word spread about the soap cubs and their unusual training. Some cadets asked to observe their practice sessions. A few instructors came to watch, curious about human methods. Commander Vortash also came to watch one day. He stood at the edge of the training hall, massive arms crossed, observing in silence. The cubs performed a complex tactical drill that required constant adaptation to changing conditions. They moved like water, flowing around obstacles, supporting each other seamlessly. When the drill ended, Vortash approached Taiho. "Your cubs move well," he admitted. "But movement is not victory. In the trial they will face my warriors. Size and strength will dominate, maybe," Taiho said calmly. "Or maybe the trial will teach us all something new." Vortash's grinding laugh rumbled. "We shall see, human. We shall see." After he left, Wraith approached Taiho. "Instructor, can we truly defeat his squadron?" Taiho looked at his 8 cubs. They'd grown so much in 2 months. Not just in skill, but in confidence, creativity, and unity. They'd gone from rigid machines executing protocols to adaptive warriors thinking for themselves. "I don't know if you'll win," Taiho said honestly, "but I know you'll surprise everyone, including Vortash, including yourselves. And sometimes that's better than winning." The cubs didn't fully understand what he meant. Not yet, but they would when the trial came. They would understand that the real victory wasn't defeating others. It was becoming more than you thought you could be. The soap incident had taught them that lesson. Now they just had to prove it to the galaxy. Week 3 began with intense preparation. The cubs would face their first major evaluation in 2 days. A simulated combat scenario in the Academy's advanced holographic arena. Every instructor's squad would be tested, and the results would be recorded in official Academy records. It was a chance for the cubs to prove themselves. It was also a chance for them to fail publicly. Taiho pushed them hard. They ran combat drills from morning until night. The cubs practiced formations, tactical responses, equipment handling, and emergency protocols. By the evening of the second day, all 8 cubs were exhausted. Their fur was matted with sweat and grime from the training course. Synthetic blood from training markers stained their uniforms. Mud from the outdoor obstacles covered their boots and equipment. They stood at attention in the training hall while Taiho conducted final inspection. He walked down the line, examining each cub. Their skills had improved dramatically, but their appearance was terrible. Equipment hung dirty on their bodies. Weapons showed residue from the day's exercises. They looked like they'd been through a real battle, not a training session. In human military tradition, soldiers cleaned their equipment before important events. It was about discipline, about showing respect for your tools and your mission. Taiho wanted his cubs to understand this principle. He finished his inspection and stood before the group. Good work today. You're ready for tomorrow's evaluation. But look at yourselves. Look at your equipment. He gestured at their dirty state. Clean up before practice tomorrow. I want you sharp. The cubs nodded seriously. Wraith responded with formal precision. Yes, instructor. We understand. Dismissed, Taiho said. Get rest. Tomorrow matters. The cubs filed out of the training hall, heading toward their barracks. Taiho watched them go, satisfied. They'd worked hard. They'd earned their rest. He turned to Yuna, who was organizing training data on a tablet. They're ready, he said. Yuna looked up and smiled. They are. You've done good work with them, Taiho. We've done good work, he corrected. I couldn't have managed without your translations. They secured the training hall and went to their own quarters. Tomorrow would be important. Taiho wanted his cubs to show the academy what they'd learned. He wanted to prove that human methods had value, that unconventional thinking could work alongside traditional excellence. He slept well that night, confident in his team. The next morning, Taiho and Yuna arrived at the holographic combat arena 30 minutes before the scheduled evaluation. Several other instructors were already there with their own squads, preparing for their turn in the simulation. Commander Vortash stood with his Krell warriors, massive and intimidating in their combat gear. Taiho looked around for his cubs. They should have arrived by now. Punctuality was important. Then he heard the sound, dripping, splashing, footsteps squelching with liquid. The 8 Velkorian cubs marched into the arena in perfect formation. But something was terribly wrong. They were completely covered in soap. Thick white foam covered every inch of their bodies. Bubbles floated from their ears and whiskers. Their normally sleek fur stood up in soapy spikes. Soap suds dripped from their uniforms, their equipment, their weapons. Their golden eyes were squeezed nearly shut, clearly irritated by the cleaning chemicals. But they maintained perfect military posture, standing at attention as they marched to their designated position. The arena floor became slick with soapy water wherever they stepped. Silence fell over the arena. Every instructor, every cadet, every observer stared at the soap-covered Velkorians. For a long moment, nobody moved. Then Commander Vortash began to laugh. It was a deep, grinding sound that echoed through the arena. His Krell warriors joined in. Within seconds, most of the room was laughing. The cubs stood rigid, their humiliation visible despite the soap covering their faces. Young Zif's ears were flat against his head. Mora's tail had gone completely still. Even Wraith, their proud leader, looked like he wanted to disappear. Taiho felt his stomach drop. What had happened? Why were they covered in soap? Then realization hit him like cold water. Clean up before practice, he'd said it casually, a simple instruction. But to the cubs, with their literal interpretation of language, it had been a direct order. They'd clean themselves up. Immediately before practice, exactly as instructed. Yuna stood beside him, her hand over her mouth. She'd realized the same thing. Other instructors approached, still laughing. A tall alien with multiple arms spoke loudly. Is this human training? Teaching warriors to bathe in combat? Perhaps the soap will make them slippery and hard to catch, another instructor suggested, triggering fresh laughter. Vortash walked closer, his massive form dominating the space. I told you, human. Your primitive methods confuse them. Look at these cubs. They are a joke. You have made them a joke. He turned to address the whole arena. This is what happens when the Academy hires unqualified instructors. The cubs heard every word. Tejo could see their shoulders tensing, their pride being crushed under the weight of mockery. They'd followed orders exactly as they understood them. They'd done nothing wrong by their understanding, but they were being humiliated in front of the entire Academy. Tejo made a decision. He walked calmly to the equipment locker at the side of the arena. Everyone watched, curious about what he would do. He opened the locker and pulled out 2 large bottles of industrial cleaning solvent, the same type the cubs had clearly used on themselves. Without hesitation, without explanation, he opened the first bottle and poured it over his own head. The thick soap splashed over his hair, his face, his uniform. He didn't flinch. He opened the second bottle and turned to Yuna. For just a moment, Yuna's eyes widened. Then she understood. She stepped forward and bowed her head. Tejo poured the second bottle over her, covering her in the same soap that covered their cubs. The laughter died away. Confusion replaced mockery. Tejo dropped the empty bottles and walked to stand in front of his 8 cubs. Soap dripped from his hair into his eyes. He ignored it. Yuna joined him, equally covered. "If my cubs are covered in soap," Tejo said loudly, his voice carrying through the arena, "then their human instructors stand with them. We practice as a unit." He turned to face the cubs directly. When he spoke now, his voice was gentle but clear. "The fault is mine. I used unclear language. In human culture, the phrase clean up can mean many different things. I meant for you to make your equipment ready for inspection, to prepare your tools for today's evaluation. I apologize for the confusion in my instruction." Wraith's eyes, red from soap irritation, widened slightly. The other cubs remained still, processing this. Tejo allowed himself a small smile. "But since we are already covered in soap, let us make this interesting. Combat practice will proceed as scheduled. The soap makes everything more challenging. This is good training." He turned back to the watching crowd. "We will conduct our evaluation as planned. Does anyone object?" The arena was silent. Even Vortash seemed unsure how to respond. This human had just humiliated himself in solidarity with his students. It was an action no one had expected. The senior evaluator, a being with silver skin and no visible face, stepped forward. The human instructor accepts responsibility for his squad's condition. "This is acceptable. The evaluation will proceed." Tejo nodded. "Thank you." He looked at his cubs. "Formation positions. Standard evaluation protocols. The soap changes nothing about what you have learned." The cubs moved into position. They were still covered in soap, still partially blind from irritation, still dealing with the slippery conditions. But something had changed. Their posture was different now. Their shoulders were back. They moved with dignity despite the absurdity of their situation, because their instructor had joined them in that absurdity. He hadn't blamed them. He'd taken responsibility. He'd made himself look equally foolish. In Valkorian culture, leaders never showed weakness. They never accepted blame that could be pushed to subordinates. But this human leader had done exactly that. The evaluation simulation activated. Holographic enemies appeared in the arena. The cubs had to clear a hostile environment and secure an objective. Standard combat scenario used 1,000 times before, except now the floor was slick with soapy water. Every step risked slipping. Vision was compromised. Movement was unpredictable. The cubs should have failed immediately. But something remarkable happened. They adapted. Wraith called out orders, adjusting tactics for the slippery floor. Kivo used his greater weight to stay stable while providing cover fire. Tora and Liz developed a new movement pattern, sliding deliberately instead of walking. Shen found that soap-covered surfaces could be used for faster sliding movements around corners. They turned the soap from a liability into a tactical advantage. Tejo and Yuna fought alongside them, 2 soap-covered humans moving with their 8 soap-covered cubs. Tejo slipped and fell twice, getting back up without complaint. Yuna discovered that soap made her harder for the holographic enemies to grab. What should have been a disaster became something extraordinary. The cubs were using unconventional tactics forced on them by absurd circumstances. They were thinking creatively, adapting instantly, supporting each other through chaos. They completed the objective in record time. When the simulation ended, all 10 figures stood in the center of the arena, dripping soap, exhausted, victorious. The first week felt like a disaster. Every day brought new misunderstandings. Tejo would give instructions that made perfect sense to a human, and the cubs would interpret them in ways that created chaos. When he told them to take 5, they tried to take 5 of something. When he said, "Bring your A game," they searched their equipment for a game labeled A. When he told them to hustle, they attempted to start trading goods with each other. Yuna spent hours each day translating, explaining, trying to bridge the gap between human casual speech and Valkorian literal understanding. She started keeping a notebook of every phrase that caused confusion, writing down the human meaning next to what the cubs had actually done. But something positive emerged from the confusion. The cubs began to ask questions. At first they asked hesitantly, afraid of showing ignorance. In Valkorian military culture, admitting you didn't understand was seen as weakness. But Tejo encouraged questions. He praised cubs who asked for clarification instead of making assumptions. A warrior who acts on wrong information is dangerous to their entire unit, Tejo explained one morning. A warrior who asks questions might look foolish for 5 seconds, but they'll make the right decision when it matters. Slowly, the cubs started to change. Wraith was the first to fully embrace asking questions. During a training exercise on the 3rd day, Tejo instructed the team to cover each other. Wraith raised his hand. "Instructor, do you mean physically place our bodies over our teammates? Or do you mean provide supporting fire so enemies cannot target them?" Tejo smiled. "The second one." "Good question, Wraith." After that, questions came more freely. The cubs realized their human instructor wasn't mocking them for not understanding. He was genuinely trying to teach them something new. Physical training went better than communication. The cubs were natural athletes. Tejo designed obstacle courses that challenged their agility and speed. He taught them hand-to-hand combat techniques that humans used, adapted for their different body structure and strength. The cubs learned quickly once they understood what was being asked of them. Kiva, one of the larger cubs, showed particular talent for close-quarters combat. He learned to use his greater strength in ways that surprised Tejo. Tora and Les worked well as a team, covering each other's movements with natural synchronization. Young Zif struggled with confidence but showed creative thinking when solving tactical problems. But they still moved like programmed machines executing drills. Tejo needed them to think independently, to adapt, to be unpredictable. That was what made human soldiers dangerous despite their physical disadvantages. On the 5th day, Tejo set up a combat simulation. The cubs would face a holographic enemy force and had to capture a specific objective. He deliberately gave them minimal instructions, just the goal and basic parameters. The cubs approached the problem exactly as their previous training had taught them. They formed standard formations, used standard tactics, moved with standard precision. The holographic enemies, programmed with basic defensive AI, easily predicted every move. The cubs failed the objective 3 times in a row. After the 3rd failure, Wraith struck the wall in frustration. His claws left deep scratches in the metal. "We are doing everything correctly." "Why do we fail?" "You're doing everything correctly according to standard doctrine," Tejo said. "That's the problem. The enemy knows standard doctrine too. They expect it. You need to do something they don't expect." "But doctrine exists because it is effective," Shen argued. 3,000 years of military science proves these tactics work. "They work when both sides follow the same rules," Tejo countered. "But what happens when your enemy doesn't follow those rules? What happens when you face something completely new?" The cubs looked confused. Yuna stepped in to help explain. "Humans are very new to space. We don't have 3,000 years of refined tactics. We barely have 200 years. So human soldiers learn to improvise, to make up new solutions when old ones don't work. Sometimes our tactics look foolish or primitive to other species, but they work because nobody expects them." Mora, one of the quieter cubs, spoke up. "You want us to break doctrine?" "I want you to think beyond doctrine," Tejo said. "Use it as a foundation, not a prison. Your species has advantages. You're fast, strong, have excellent senses. Standard tactics don't fully use those advantages because they're designed to work for every species. What if you designed tactics that only worked for Valkorians?" He could see the idea starting to take hold in their minds. It went against everything they'd been taught, but it also excited them. They tried the simulation again. This time, Tejo gave them permission to ignore standard formations. Wraith organized the team differently, putting the fastest cubs in unexpected positions. They used their claws to climb surfaces the simulation designers hadn't expected anyone to climb. They moved through ventilation systems their smaller bodies could fit through. The simulation's AI wasn't programmed to handle tactics that broke standard doctrine. The Cubs succeeded capturing their objective in half the expected time. The victory was small, but the Cubs celebrated like they'd won a major battle. For the first time, they'd solved a problem their own way, not the way the manual told them to. Word of their success spread through the academy. Not everyone was impressed. Commander Vortash visited their training hall the next day, bringing several other senior instructors with him. "I heard your Cubs broke formation protocols," Vortash said to Tejo. "You teach them to ignore discipline?" "I teach them to think," Tejo replied calmly. "Discipline and independent thought aren't opposites. In 3,000 years, we have perfected military doctrine. Your species has existed in space for barely a moment. You think you can improve on perfection?" Vortash's voice carried contempt. "I don't think humans are better," Tejo said. "I think humans are different. And sometimes different perspectives solve problems that perfection misses." Another instructor, a tall being with translucent skin, spoke up. "The young warriors must learn proper methods. Your unconventional approach will confuse them." Yuna moved to stand beside Tejo. "With respect, the Cubs are learning faster now than they did in their first 2 months here. We have the progress reports to prove it. This was true." Despite the communication difficulties, the Cubs were developing skills at an impressive rate. Once they understood a concept, they mastered it with frightening speed. Their combination of natural Velkorian abilities and human-taught adaptability was creating something unique. Vortash made his grinding laugh sound again. "We shall see how your confused Cubs perform in the trial of merit. My warriors will show you the difference between amateur innovation and professional excellence." Left with the other instructors following. After they were gone, Tejo found the 8 Cubs waiting silently. They'd heard everything. "Instructor," Wraith said quietly, "are we learning the wrong things?" Tejo looked at each of them. They were young, uncertain, caught between their traditional upbringing and the new ideas he was teaching them. He understood that feeling. Every human soldier faced it during training, learning to question assumptions while still maintaining discipline. "You're learning to adapt," Tejo said. "That's never wrong. Yes, your methods are unconventional. Yes, other instructors doubt them. But the measure of tactics isn't whether they look proper. It's whether they achieve the objective and bring your team home alive. Commander Vortash's Cubs are bigger and stronger than us," Zif said, worry clear in his voice. "True," Tejo agreed. "They're also predictable. They'll do exactly what their training tells them to do. You know what they'll do, but they won't know what you'll do because you're learning to think for yourselves. That's an advantage," Liz tilted her head. "You believe we can defeat them?" "I believe you can surprise everyone, including yourselves," Tejo said. "But we have a lot more work to do first." The Cubs returned to training with renewed focus. They still made mistakes. Communication problems still happened daily. But something had changed. They weren't just following orders anymore. They were beginning to understand why the orders mattered, and sometimes they were beginning to think of better ways to achieve the same goals. Yuna watched them work and smiled. "They're starting to think like humans," she said to Tejo. "No," Tejo corrected. "They're starting to think like Velkorians who learned from humans. That's different. That's better." The transport ship docked at Orbital Station Theta 7 with a soft hiss. Tejo Kim stood in the airlock holding a single bag with all his belongings. He looked out the window at the massive station floating in space. This was the Galactic Combat Academy, the most famous military training facility in known space, and he was about to become its first human instructor. Tejo was not a tall man. He stood at average human height with dark hair cut short and sharp eyes that missed nothing. He wore a simple gray uniform with Earth's military insignia on the shoulder. 20 years of service in Earth's special forces had taught him many things. How to survive, how to adapt, how to lead soldiers through impossible situations. But nothing had prepared him for this moment. The airlock opened, and he stepped into the station. The gravity felt slightly heavier than Earth's. The air smelled different, processed through alien filtration systems. Dozens of species moved through the corridors. Some walked on 2 legs like humans. Others had 4 legs or 6 or floated using technology he didn't understand. All of them wore military uniforms of different colors and designs. A human woman waited for him at the gate. She smiled and extended her hand. Instructor Kim? I'm Lieutenant Yuna Park. I'll be your cultural liaison and co-instructor. Taiho shook her hand firmly. Just Taiho is fine. You're the xenobiologist? That's right, Yuna said. She had kind eyes and spoke with calm confidence. I've been here for 3 years studying how different species communicate and learn. You're going to need my help. They walked through the station together. Yuna explained the layout, the rules, the politics. The academy had existed for 3,000 years. It trained elite warriors from every major civilization in the galaxy. Humans had only joined the galactic community 200 years ago. Most species still saw them as newcomers, primitive and unproven. Why did they hire a human instructor? Taiho asked. Yuna laughed softly. The Academy Council wants to expand their training methods. They've been using the same tactics for centuries. Someone suggested that humans, being so new to space, might offer fresh perspectives. Not everyone agreed with that decision. They reached the training hall, a massive room with high ceilings and equipment that looked both familiar and alien. Advanced holographic systems lined the walls. Training weapons stood in neat rows. Everything was clean and organized to the point of perfection. 8 figures stood at attention in the center of the hall. They were Velcorians, the feline-like species Taiho would be training. Each one stood nearly 7 feet tall, with sleek fur in shades of gray and brown. Their eyes were large and golden, designed for hunting in low light. Retractable claws tipped their fingers. They looked like they could tear a human apart without much effort. These are the cubs, Yuna whispered. That's what they call their young warriors before certification. They're technically still teenagers by their standards, but don't let that fool you. They're faster and stronger than most adult humans. Taiho approached the group. All 8 cubs watched him with expressions he couldn't quite read. Curiosity, doubt, perhaps both. I am Instructor Taiho Kim, he said clearly. I'll be training you for the next 3 months in preparation for your combat certification. The tallest cub, who stood at the front, spoke. His voice was deep and carried a slight purring quality. I am Wraith, Squadron Leader. With respect, Instructor, why should we learn from a human? Your species has no claws, no enhanced senses, no natural weapons. What can you teach us? It was a fair question. Taiho had expected it. You're right. Humans are physically weaker than most species. We can't see in the dark as well as you. We don't have claws or armor or most advantages that evolution gave to other species. But we survived anyway. We made it to the stars anyway. I'm here to teach you how. Another cub spoke up, a female with darker fur. You will teach us human tactics? I will teach you to adapt, Taiho corrected. Human tactics work for humans because we built them around our weaknesses. You're not human, but the principles of adaptation, of creative thinking, of turning disadvantages into advantages, those principles work for anyone. Yuna stepped forward. Let me introduce everyone. You've met Wraith. The others are Kivo, Shen, Tora, Lis, Ven, Mora, and Zif. She pointed to each cub as she said their names. The youngest, Zif, looked barely old enough to be in military training. Before Taiho could continue, another figure entered the training hall. This newcomer was massive, easily 9 feet tall, with thick scaled skin and eyes like black glass. He wore an ornate uniform decorated with medals and honors. His presence commanded attention. Commander Vortash, Yuna said quietly. Krell Empire. Senior Instructor. Vortash looked at Taiho and made a sound like grinding rocks. Taiho realized the alien was laughing. So this is the human they appointed. Even smaller than I expected. He turned to the cubs. Young warriors, do not waste time with this primitive. Humans are barely spacefaring. They have nothing to teach you. Wraith and the other cubs remained at attention, but Taiho could see the doubt in their eyes. Vortash's words carried weight. He was proven, decorated, respected. Taiho met Vortash's gaze calmly. Commander, I look forward to seeing your squadron in the training exercises. Vortash's laugh deepened. My cubs would destroy yours in seconds, but I will enjoy watching them try. He left the hall, his heavy footsteps echoing. An uncomfortable silence followed. Taiho could feel the cubs' uncertainty. They had been excited to prove themselves, to earn their warrior status. Now they wondered if they had been assigned to the worst instructor in the academy. First day, Taiho said, breaking the silence. We start simple. Show me what you know. Combat positions, basic formations, standard response to threats. Let's see your training so far. The cubs moved into position. Their movements were precise, coordinated, exactly as military doctrine demanded. They were good, very good. But they moved like machines following programming, not like warriors thinking for themselves. Taiho watched carefully. He saw their strength, their speed, their natural predator instincts. But he also saw rigidity. They had been trained to follow orders exactly, to execute specific responses to specific situations. No flexibility, no innovation. This was going to be harder than he thought. But Taiho had spent his whole career taking difficult situations and finding ways to win. This was just another mission. Good, he said when they finished. Very precise. Now I want to see something different. Yuna will explain the exercise. For the next 2 hours, Taiho and Yuna put the cubs through basic human-style military drills, obstacle courses, hand-to-hand combat practice, simple tactical problems. The cubs were physically impressive, but something became clear very quickly. They didn't understand human instructions. When Taiho told them to watch their six, meaning watch their back, they spent several confused minutes searching for a marker with the number 6 on it. When he said hit the deck, expecting them to drop to the ground, they attacked the floor panels with their claws. When he told them to fall in line, they literally fell over in a row. By the end of the session, both species were frustrated. The cubs felt foolish. Taiho felt like he was speaking a different language, which in a way he was. After dismissing the cubs, Taiho sat down heavily on a bench. Yuna joined him. That went well, she said with gentle sarcasm. They're taking everything literally, Taiho said. Of course they are. Felkorian language evolved without idioms or metaphors. When they say something, they mean exactly that. Nothing more, nothing less. To them, your instructions sound like nonsense. Taiho rubbed his face. How am I supposed to teach them if I can't even explain basic concepts? Yuna smiled. That's why I'm here. I'll help translate. But Taiho, you need to understand something. They're not stupid. They're just different. Once they understand what you mean, they'll master it faster than you can imagine. You just need to bridge the gap first. Taiho nodded slowly. This was going to be a long 3 months.